Good evening and welcome to Washington. I'm Doug McKelway in for Bret Baier. Secretary of State John Kerry defended the administration's decision to abstain from the UN Security Council vote last week, condemning Israel's settlements, and warned that a two-state solution is now at risk. Israel's prime minister quickly fired back, reminding the Obama administration that its days are numbered. We have Fox team coverage. John Huddy is in Jerusalem with today's strong reaction from Benjamin Netanyahu. Peter Doocy is in Florida, where Donald Trump shared tweets with the Israeli PM today. But we begin with correspondent Rich Edson at the State Department with a message the Secretary of State is trying to send. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Doug. And the State Department billed this as an opportunity for the Obama administration to outline its plan for Palestinians and Israelis to find peace. And Secretary of State John Kerry delivered that, and then a strong condemnation of Israeli policy.
Some seem to believe that the U.S. friendship means the U.S. must accept any policy, regardless of our own interests, our own positions, our own words, our own principles, even after urging again and again that the policy must change. Friends need to tell each other the hard truths, and friendships require mutual respect.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his government, and its allies criticized the Obama administration this past week after the United States allowed a United Nations Security Council resolution pass that condemned Israel over its settlement building. The Prime Minister continued his rebuke of U.S. policy, greeting Kerry's speech with what he called great disappointment.
Secretary Kerry paid lip service to the unremitting campaign of terrorism that has been waged by the Palestinians against the Jewish state. Israelis do not need to be lectured about the importance of peace by foreign leaders.
An exasperated Kerry claims no American administration has done more for Israel's security than Barack Obama's. He points out more than half of U.S. global foreign military financing goes to Israel, and the Obama administration has strongly defended Israel and opposed boycotts, divestment campaigns, and sanctions targeting against the longtime U.S. ally. Kerry spent much of his speech denouncing Israel on the expansion of its settlements, chastising the Netanyahu administration, calling his coalition the most right-wing in Israeli history, with an agenda driven by its most extreme elements, and claiming its settlements policy is, in part, jeopardizing any possibility for a two-state solution, where Israel lives in peace next to an independent Palestinian state.
It is not in U.S. interest to help anyone on either side create a unitary state. And we may not be able to stop them, but we cannot be expected to defend them. If the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both. And it won't ever really be at peace.
Kerry also criticized the Palestinians and their government for failing to condemn specific terrorist attacks and naming public squares, streets, and schools after terrorists. The Israeli government maintains the Obama administration coordinated last week's Security Council resolution. Kerry denies that and says the U.S. warned Israel of its eventual abstention.
We have all known for some time that the Palestinians were intent on moving forward in the UN with a settlements resolution. And I advised Prime Minister repeatedly that further settlement activity only invited UN action.
And as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu concluded his response to Secretary Kerry, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas released a statement of his own, saying that he is also ready to resume peace negotiations if Israel stops building settlements. Doug?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Thank you, Rich. Prime Minister Netanyahu's reaction to today's speech by Secretary Kerry comes as tempers have flared since the vote on Friday, including accusations that the United States had been planning the Security Council resolution all along. Correspondent John Huddy reports tonight from our Jerusalem bureau.
There was no love lost between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry.
Israelis do not need to be lectured about the importance of peace by foreign leaders.
Secretary Kerry's speech and the Israeli reaction is perhaps the climax of several days of a fierce political battle and fiery rhetoric. Israeli officials maintain the U.S., despite Kerry's comments to the contrary, worked with the Palestinians and Egyptians in crafting and orchestrating Friday's resolution. And a senior Israeli official told me that it's, quote, just the tip of the iceberg as far as U.S.-Palestinian collusion. The Prime prime minister also saying Israel has evidence that will be presented to the new administration. It's unclear what exactly that evidence is. Egyptian media reported about the existence of meeting minutes between Kerry, U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat earlier this month. But State Department officials contend there was never a tripartite meeting and that the U.S. was not the driving force behind the resolution.
The Egyptians and Palestinians had long made clear to all of us, to all of the international community, their intention to bring a resolution to a vote before the end of the year. And we communicated that to the Israelis, and they knew it anyway. The United States did not draft or originate this resolution, nor did we put it forward.
Tonight, Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat read a statement on behalf of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
The minute the Israeli government agrees to cease all settlement activities, including in East Jerusalem, the Palestinian leadership stands ready to resume permanent status negotiations.
And the Palestinians want the negotiations to be based on Friday's UN resolution. That alone could be a non-starter for Israeli officials. That said, a Palestinian delegation plans to attend a Middle East peace conference next month in Paris aimed at restarting talks between the Israelis and Palestinians, a conference, though, that some Israeli officials are calling a scheme to hurt Israel's credibility. Doug?
John Huddy in Jerusalem tonight. Thank you, John. President-elect Donald Trump made a brief appearance outside Mar-a-Lago just moments ago to offer his take on Secretary Kerry's Israeli policy speech. Correspondent Peter Ducey is with the Trump camp in Florida and has the latest for us tonight on that. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Doug. After days of criticizing the Obama administration for turning their back on our ally Israel, the president-elect says he spoke to President Obama on the phone and they had a nice conversation, but he didn't have anything nice to say about Secretary Kerry's 70-minute-long speech about Middle East peace.
The UN has such tremendous potential, not living up to its potential. There is such tremendous potential, but it is not living up. When do you see the United Nations solving problems? They don't. They cause problems. So if it lives up to the potential, it's a great thing, and if it doesn't, it's a waste of time and money.
He has to wait another 3 weeks to take the oath of office, but the president-elect isn't waiting to do some diplomatic triage. Tweeting today, quote, "We cannot continue to let Israel be treated with such total disdain and disrespect. They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal, and now this. UN. Stay strong, Israel. January 20th is fast approaching." That two-part tweet caught Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attention. His official account tweeted back gratefully, quote, "President-elect Trump, thank you for your warm friendship and your clear-cut support for Israel." A non-social media signal, America's relationship with ally Israel may change sooner rather than later. The transition team just named a special representative for international negotiations, and it's the longtime Trump Organization lawyer turned Trump campaign advisor on U.S. and Israeli relations, Jason Greenblatt. Mr. Trump had a full schedule in Florida on Wednesday, talking about the open agriculture secretary job with former Texas A&M president Elsa Morano, and meeting with a handful of executives from some of America's top hospitals, like Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and the Cleveland Clinic. The Cleveland Clinic was represented by a leading contender to become VA Secretary, Dr. Toby Cosgrove. Whoever gets picked for VA or agriculture jobs are going to join a group that may face some big fights when confirmation time comes.
Politics is warfare, and the reason that Democrats are going to put up a fight and try and rough up these nominees in the committee hearings as much as they can is because it's what the party base is demanding.
Mr. Trump also announced this evening that Sprint is going to bring 5,000 jobs back to the United States, and a company called OneWeb is going to hire 3,000 Americans. He says this is only possible because there's a spirit of hope in this country right now. And right after he made that economic announcement, something extraordinary happened. The press pool was loading back up into vans to leave Mar-a-Lago, and the president-elect came back out because he said he wanted to talk about what he's been doing in regards to the Veterans Affairs Administration. An official with him then said the transition team is considering a private option that would allow veterans to seek treatment at private facilities. Doug.
Peter Ducey outside Mar-a-Lago tonight in West Palm Beach. Thank you for that, Peter. We're going to bring in our panel a little bit early tonight because of the importance of today's news. Let's start with that right now. Daniel Halper of the New York Post joins us. Also, Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com. Amy Walter, national editor for the Cook Political Report, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, we are in a real danger zone, a point at which U.S.-Israeli relations have descended to a point which I've never seen in my adult life. I suspect you probably concur with that. But what remains unresolved is whether this is a temporary situation until the new administration takes place, or whether the damage is long-lasting here.
Well, the damage from the resolution is long-lasting. It's a matter of international law. The Israelis cannot escape it. The damage from the speech today, I think, is meaningless. Nobody's going to remember it after a month. This is Kerry bloviating, trying to express himself emotionally mostly, but it will have no import because that administration and the view behind it will be swept away. There was one important element in the 70 minutes of that word salad, and it was important because I think there is a ray of hope. The danger for the Israelis, the danger for the peace process, was that there was another shoe to drop. Possibly, Obama would go back to the Security Council, take the Kerry six-point plan, and impose it on the Israelis through Security Council resolution. That's been a threat. And the second threat was that Obama would unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state demanding nothing in return from the Palestinians, meaning that the state of war continues, the terrorism continues, etc. Well, there was a passage buried in those 70 minutes of Kerry which seemed to rule those two threats out, where Kerry says there are some who want us to dictate the terms of the solution in the Security Council. He said these are not choices we will make, and he said others want us to simply recognize the Palestinian state absent an agreement, and again he says these are not choices we will make. If Kerry sticks with that, then the damage is done, and we will start all over again on January the 20th. I hope he sticks to it. You don't know what will happen in Paris, but unless he betrays his own words, it looks like the damage is done, and it will be somewhat limited.
Amy, even when Kerry and Netanyahu are talking about the same thing, about who specifically won't recognize Israel, they're kind of talking over each other. Listen to these sound bites butted together here.
The persistent Palestinian refusal to recognize a Jewish state remains the core of the conflict, and its removal is the key to peace. Palestinian rejection of Israel and support for terror are what the nations of the world should focus on if they truly want to advance peace. And I can only express my regret and say that it's a shame that Secretary Kerry does not see this simple truth.
Most troubling of all, Hamas continues to pursue an extremist agenda. They refuse to accept Israel's very right to exist. They have a one-state vision of their own. All of the land is Palestine.
So Kerry's saying Hamas refuses to accept Israel's right to exist. Mr. Netanyahu says Palestinians refuse to accept it.
Look, the long-term effects, I agree with Charles about whether or not they're going to be significant, or whether or not they'll be significant. But the reality is, for this administration, the relationship with Netanyahu has been the issue. And that this seemed to be as much about a rebuke of Netanyahu personally than it was about a rebuke of overall the Israeli policy. And that, I think, is what we're going to be remembering when we look back on this. The Trump administration clearly is coming in with a very different perspective. And I think that's what's also important to remember, is that for many folks, especially in official Washington, the expectation was that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. And so the fact that she is not the president, that there's a Trump administration coming in with very different perspectives, very different views on everything from settlements to a two-state solution, at least in terms of the people that he's putting around him, their views on this, adds fuel to what is clearly a long-simmering fire between Netanyahu and the Obama administration.
Katie, I'm struck again as Mr. Kerry was delivering this, by my count, 1 hour and 12-minute long speech. The president again, a long way away in Hawaii, distantly removed from the dirtiness of all this, or the sort of details.
As Amy just pointed out, this has been a long-standing issue between Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu, but I think today, focusing on John Kerry's speech, it's important to listen to the words that he says, because when he says that the Palestinians want a one-state solution as well, he's actually not being totally honest with the people he's speaking to, because when you look at the charters of the people who have influence, Hamas, Fatah, the influence in the Palestinian government, it's not about having a one-state solution. It's about completely annihilating the Jewish people and destroying Israel as a whole. And if that's where they're starting from and they can't recognize that Israel has the right to exist, where are you supposed to go from there? And that's where the frustration and talking over each other comes from. And also, you know, John Kerry is stressing today that, you know, the United States can disagree as a friend with you and issue some tough love. But this, to Benjamin Netanyahu, isn't about a disagreement. This is about a betrayal. And he feels as though this should have not been brought to the Security Council. This should have been dealt with, a disagreement that's long-standing, should have been dealt with behind closed doors in negotiations between the United States and Israel. And so it's not about not being able to take tough love on Israel's behalf. It's about a betrayal from the United States and a reversal of long-standing policy to defend Israel in front of the UN.
Daniel, observations?
Well, look, I think it is worth pointing out some of the misperceptions and ideas in John Kerry's speech. I mean, the whole anti-settlement craze hinges on the notion that Jews wouldn't be wouldn't be allowed to live in a Palestinian state under the final solution, right? That there would be some sort of Palestinian, you know, the settlements are basically apartment buildings we're talking about, and they're saying Jews can't build here because the Palestinians won't allow that and won't allow any that to happen in a final state. So I think that sort of mindset is sort of washed over and baked in, and it's perhaps damaging. But as far as John Kerry's speech goes, it's pure fantasy. I mean, this has nothing to do with the reality of what's going to be happening. The UN action is obviously very real. It has consequences. But Kerry and what President Obama, though he is vacationing and hitting the links, this is very much with his blessing, as his own administration has told us. What that's about, I think, is changing the way the Democrats and the way the half of the government, or will be perhaps, views Israel and interacts with Israel in the future. This is not something that, you know, they're not going to achieve peace in the next 3 weeks, but they will change the way Democrats look and interact with Israel, and in a real, very real way, and perhaps alter that perception.
Charles, was it? Go ahead.
I just want to say there's one thing that hasn't been raised here, and that is, if the administration wants to, if we want to give it the benefit of the doubt about outlying settlements as an obstacle to peace and all that, fine. But why, when the resolution came to a vote, did they not insist on removing the gratuitous language that says including East Jerusalem? Because if you'd had it on the territories, you could say, okay, we're going to argue about the outlying settlements. But what everybody understands, what turns the resolution from unwise to scandalous, is that it essentially declares that the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, the central areas of the Jewish identity in the world for 2,000 years are alien territory that the Jews have no claim to. Now, even this administration doesn't believe in that. If that's the case, why didn't they simply insist on removing that phrase, including East Jerusalem? And that would have at least eliminated the most egregious and scandalous elements in the resolution. There was no explanation of that, and this resolution now, as a part of international law, says that the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem is an area where Jews should not be allowed to live.
And we're reminded again that President-elect Trump's pick to be the ambassador to Israel is David Friedman, who wants to relocate the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
But it will not be East Jerusalem, it would be West Jerusalem. It's a lot less scandalous than it sounds.
Important distinction. Coming up next, the not-so-easy transition between the Obama and Trump administrations, which we've already been talking about to an extent. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox Carolina, where the man on trial for killing 9 people at a church in Charleston last year told a judge he will not call any witnesses when the penalty phase of his trial begins next week. Dylan Roof is acting as his own attorney in the penalty phase after he was found guilty of 33 counts, including hate crimes earlier this month. He faces the possibility of life in prison or the death penalty. Fox 13 in Salt Lake City where the state of Utah is asking the Supreme Court to uphold its ban on polygamy. The brief this week was filed this week as Utah's response to a petition by reality TV star and polygamist Cody Brown and his 4 wives who sued the state over the polygamy ban. And this is a live look at Orlando from Fox 35. The big story there tonight is the deaths of 2 people after their plane crashed into a front yard. One witness says the single-engine plane was in a flat spin when it crashed during foggy weather in Port Orange. And that's tonight's live look outside from the Beltway. From Special Report, we'll be right back. The Obama administration is ramping up plans to punish Russia for interfering in the election as President-elect Trump ramps up rhetoric over what he calls roadblocks from President Obama. All this with just 23 days to go until the inauguration. Correspondent Kevin Cork is traveling with President Obama in Hawaii and reports tonight from Honolulu.
A parting shot at Putin. That's what some are calling the White House's decision to hit the Russians with a new wave of economic sanctions for cyber hacking during the run-up to the 2016 U.S. election. Sources tell Fox News that punishment could come as soon as Thursday, though some GOP lawmakers are questioning the timing of the administration's decision.
Here's what I would prefer. Let the new Congress and the new president deal with Russia, pass new sanctions much tougher than the ones we already have.
It's the latest in a series of major moves by President Obama, who's just weeks away from leaving office, but has remained aggressive during the lame duck period. From barring states from denying federal money to Planned Parenthood, to a permanent ban on energy development in parts of the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans, and scrapping a dormant registry for male immigrants from a list of largely Muslim countries. Analysts believe this is just the sort of late flurry that critics were worried about.
The only reason to destroy those regulations is to delay any effort of President Trump in carrying out his campaign promises. It's something like General Sherman burning his way through the South and leaving nothing but scorched earth in his path.
Turley further explained the new sanctions against Moscow could paint President-elect Trump into an uneasy corner, undo the heavy-handed sanctions and be seen as Putin's puppet, or leave them in place and sting the Kremlin just when it was believed a diplomatic thaw might be in the offing. Mr. Trump has certainly noticed the president's shift in both tone and action, tweeting, "Doing my best to disregard the many inflammatory President O statements and roadblocks. Thought it was going to be a smooth transition. Not."
With respect to the transition, I think they would be the first to acknowledge that we have done everything we can to make sure that they are successful, as I promised.
A broken promise, say experts, that the president-elect ultimately will have to clean up. No surprise, Doug, the Russians wasted little time in reacting to the news of a possible new round of sanctions that could be headed their way. The Kremlin saying simply they would retaliate against Washington, with a foreign ministry spokeswoman saying this whole episode has been orchestrated by the White House, calling it a provocation directed from the very top. Doug?
Kevin Cork in Honolulu tonight with President. Thank you, Kevin. A plan to bring in the new year with relative calm in Syria is reportedly taking shape. Turkey's ruling party says the government is pushing for a ceasefire as it enters 2017. The details of the ceasefire being brokered with Russia have yet to be confirmed, and a number of rebel groups say they won't agree to anything until they get more details on it. Search teams have recovered a second flight recorder from the military jet that crashed into the Black Sea on Sunday. Another flight recorder was found the previous day, and its data is already being analyzed to find out what may have led to that crash that killed 92 people. So far, Russia's counterterrorism agency has found no link to terror. German prosecutors say they have detained a possible accomplice in last week's attack on a Christmas market in Berlin. Prosecutors say the 40-year-old Tunisian man's name was saved in the cell phone of Anis Amri, the man believed to have driven the truck into the market. Fox News has also learned that investigators reportedly found pictures and voicemails sent by Amri within just 10 minutes of the attack. The president-elect's bold statements towards U.S. nuclear policy are arousing concern over the delicate balance between resuming nuclear testing and risking an arms race. Correspondent Garrett Tenney reports tonight on whether Donald Trump's nuclear vision could destroy an Obama legacy and put the world on edge.
For the last 8 years, President Obama has made stopping the spread of nuclear weapons a priority for his administration.
So as president, I've strengthened our efforts to stop the spread of nuclear weapons.
In 2013, he stood at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin and touted his administration's accomplishments on that front, including the reduction of U.S. nuclear warheads. And he's continued to build on that legacy with the landmark nuclear deal with Iran last year. It's a legacy that might not last for long, though. President-elect Trump has repeatedly said he plans to renegotiate the Iran nuclear deal. And last week, he indicated a potential 180 in U.S. nuclear policy when he tweeted, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." There are currently more than 1,300 warheads in the U.S.'s nuclear arsenal, according to the State Department. But it's not only the numbers Mr. Trump will have to decide on. There's also the testing of those weapons. The U.S. hasn't conducted nuclear tests since 1992, and some nuclear experts are concerned our missiles may not even work if we need them, and are calling on the next administration to renew testing.
So if President Putin or Kim Jong-un suspects that these things might not work, that's not a very good deterrent. And so that's one other reason why you would want to make sure that these things do work. And not only are we confident that they work, but that our enemies are confident that they work as well.
One of the biggest concerns with renewing testing is the potential it could set off an international arms race by essentially giving other countries a green light to renew or begin their own nuclear tests, including hostile countries like Russia, North Korea, and Iran.
Iran would say, well, we just signed this nuclear deal with you saying we wouldn't do that. If you're going to do it, we might as well too. So all hell would break loose if the United States were to start testing nuclear weapons again.
And as the next administration finalizes its policy positions, it will also have to figure out how to deal with the world's other nuclear superpower, Russia. Last week in an end-of-the-year press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin called on his country to enhance and strengthen its nuclear capabilities as well. Doug?
Thank you, Garrett. Smart technology could be the key to solving a murder in Arkansas. Investigators believe the victim's Amazon Echo could have possibly recorded details from the night in question. Amazon has handed over the suspect's account details, but not the voice recordings per se. Police have now issued a warrant to Amazon to turn over any records or audio in the case. Another melee at a mall, this time in Philadelphia. Police say several large groups of teens made their way into the food court and refused to leave, while about 30 of them fought. 4 were ultimately arrested in the fight. The mall is no longer allowing anyone under the age of 18 into the shopping center without an adult. It's the phone call that could mean the difference between life and death, but with more and more emergency calls coming from cell phones and not from landlines, the ability to pinpoint exactly where the emergency is also more difficult. And as correspondent Jonathan Seri reports, the results can be deadly.
Checking in on Facebook, ordering an Uber, your smartphone's GPS can pinpoint your exact location. But when you call 911, operators may have no idea where you are. Between 70 to 80% of all emergency calls are made on cell phones.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
And many of those calls go to the wrong 911 center.
Our most important question is, what is the location of your emergency?
Current technology uses cell towers to determine where you are, but the tower your phone pings may be miles away or even in another jurisdiction.
I'm going to have to transfer you to the city of Roswell, okay, because you're outside of our jurisdiction.
We conducted a test call standing inside the Alpharetta 911 center, where there were at least 3 misdirected calls in the 2 hours we were there.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
This is Jonathan Seri with Fox News doing a test. Can you tell me what address is showing up on your computer?
Currently, I'm only showing your cell tower location, which is at 3129 Old Milton Parkway.
More than a mile away from where I was standing. So we conducted a second test using technology from the startup Laser 911.
Can you please tell me the address that just popped up on your screen?
And this time, the 911 operator pinpointed our exact location immediately.
Your phone is very good at understanding where it is. So we let the phone do its work. It tells our system where it is, and then our system utilizes the cellular network just to transmit the voice and data necessary to complete the call.
The amount of time that's spent in the 911 center, getting to the right location is time that's wasted getting responders to the scene.
The Federal Communications Commission estimates that even a 1-minute improvement in response time to mobile callers could save more than 10,000 lives a year. The agency is mandating that by 2021, 911 centers must be able to identify dispatchable addresses of at least 80% of wireless callers. Even so, that would allow as many as 1 in 5 emergency mobile calls to fall through the cracks. Doug?
Jonathan Seri in Atlanta tonight. Thank you, Jonathan. Still ahead, what's taking the joy out of cooking? I'm sure you've heard that saying that there are just too many cooks in the kitchen. But the next time you're enjoying a nice dinner out with friends, realize that statement just may not be true. Correspondent Anita Vogel reports from Los Angeles tonight on a shortage that could be a tall order to fill.
Here we have Jaime. Right now he's a line cook, but due to the nature of the shortage of line cooks, Jaime is also like my kitchen right-hand man.
John Atkinson owns 2 restaurants in Southern California, and like many others across the nation, has trouble finding young, aspiring chefs who are willing to get their hands dirty.
It's not what you see on TV. There are no Bobby Flays in any of these kitchens. It's really just sweat and hard and hot.
This is our secret spice that we have.
It's the same story in New York, where Salvatore Coppola likes to keep both his Manhattan eateries brimming with his old Italian family recipes, but also worries about finding enough help.
It's long hours. They're getting paid, $15 to $22 to $25 an hour at this point, which is still good money. I mean, it's not where people are not earning. It's just a very difficult job.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates 200,000 more cooks will be needed in the next 8 years, but the supply has been chopped by the high cost of culinary school, wages that can start off at just $10 an hour, and millennials wanting to go out on their own, like aspiring baker Brittany Hicks.
By the time we graduate, we really are like, okay, I've kind of done that already. Now let's branch out and do it for myself.
These are students who saw how their parents were impacted by the recession of 2008. They don't want that to happen to them. They're completely entrepreneurial in spirit, and so their real goal and desire is to go out and start something on their own.
So who pays the price if there's not enough chefs?
If we have 6 cooks and we go down to 4, we would have to reduce our menu drastically.
We're talking about guys who are shrinking options, making less interesting food for consumers, which is not what we want to do.
Kitchen staffs are also shrinking because of an increase in the minimum wage and rising healthcare costs, which are eventually passed down to you, the customer. Doug?
Anita Vogel in Los Angeles tonight. Thank you. Down day on Wall Street, the Dow lost 111 points, the S&P 500 fell 19, NASDAQ dropped 49. Well, we are still waiting for the markets to hit an historic 20,000-point mark. So what will it take, and what will the economy look like under President Trump in 2017? Former finance and tax advisor for the Trump campaign, Steve Moore, joins me now. Steve, thanks for coming in. Good to see you.
Great to be with you.
You know, since the election night of November 8th, we've seen some huge changes in the stock market. First of all, when Trump was first elected, we saw a huge dive in futures. I think it was 750 points, right? And it prompted Paul Krugman at the New York Times, the economist there, to opine, and I'm quoting, "It really does now look like President Donald J. Trump and markets are plunging. When might we expect to see them recover?" A first pass answer is never. Well, as you well know, the markets did precisely the opposite of what Krugman predicted they would do. We're looking at the Dow up now 1,500 points since November 8th. That's an 8.2% gain. Yep. What caused that?
I think, by the way, Paul Krugman is almost always wrong. Every prediction he makes is wrong, so he just was being consistent and getting that wrong. Look, I think it's anticipation. I think businesses, consumers, and investors are very bullish on America right now. You saw what happened, Doug, today with 8,000 new jobs that are coming into the United States. That's great stuff. And I think people are looking at the tax cuts that are coming. I think people are looking at the regulatory reforms, the pro-growth energy policy, and they're saying this is going to be a president who takes growth in business seriously, and I think that's why you've seen this dramatic increase in the Dow Jones. You know, it's been flirting with 20,000 now for a week or two, and every time we get right near that, it falls down a little bit. But, you know, look, I think you can read too much into the short-term increase in the Dow. There's real structural problems with this economy that Donald Trump is inheriting. The $10 trillion that he's added to the national debt, the fact that we've got a record number of people outside of the workforce, 44 million people on food stamps. I mean, I could go down the line. But this isn't going to be easy. I mean, the economy is in very fragile shape right now, I believe.
Well, this harkens back to the transition between the Carter administration and the Reagan administration, because there was tremendous enthusiasm about the transfer of power. Then a great energy, a great excitement about it, but the implementation of policy was an entirely different thing.
That's right.
And I remember those ruthless battles. That was my first year in broadcasting in D.C., 1980, and it was rough and ruthless. You're going to be in for the same thing. I'm reminded of David Stockman, who was the OMB director at that time, in that infamous interview he did in Atlantic magazine, in which he said, it's kind of hard to sell trickle down. None of us really understands what's going on with all of these numbers.
Well, we found out that what happened when those tax rates fell, when Reagan came into office, the highest income tax rate was 70%, Doug. Reagan cut them all that way down to 28%. We saw one of the biggest economic booms in this country's history. We had 1 month in 1983 where the economy created 1 million jobs in 1 month. Can you imagine if Barack Obama had done that? Or I'll give you another statistic. We had a number of quarters, 6, 7, even 8% growth. Those are China kind of numbers. And I think Trump is right that if we get the policies right, we can see 4 and 5% growth. A lot of economists say it's not possible. I'm saying it is. I think we can do this if we get the policies right on regulation and taxes.
But this is not going to be without obstacles along the way. In fact, Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate today are calling for a day of action on January 15th across the country, warning that congressional Republicans are going to ram through a budget bill to throw our health care system into chaos. These are just one of the many roadblocks you're going to face.
Well, Doug, I mean, what they're talking about is Obamacare, and if there's any referendum issue in this campaign, it's that Americans are fed up with Obamacare and they want it gone. So Obamacare is Obama gone. It will be repealed. And the challenge for Republicans, Doug, will be to create a new health care system that is cheaper, gives people more coverage, but also covers everybody. And that's a challenge. And I don't know if Republicans totally have their act together on that, but they're going to have to. We don't want to see people losing their health insurance coverage come, the spring.
Okay, Steve, that's all the time we have. Appreciate your time. Good to see you. We look forward to fighting some of those battles ahead. Thanks,
Doug.
Coming up next, Trump's transition roadblocks.
I think President Obama has been terrific. He's been, very respectful of the process and everything else.
I think they would be the first to acknowledge that we have done everything we can to make sure that they are successful, as I promised, and that will continue.
Well, despite the heated rhetoric of the campaign, it seemed that the transition was going remarkably smoothly, and then suddenly things took a turn for the worse. Listen up.
I'm confident that if I had run again and articulated it, I think I could have mobilized a majority of the American people to rally behind it.
In a podcast with David Axelrod, the president suggested that he could have beaten Donald Trump, and as you can imagine, the president-elect did not take too kindly to that, tweeting, quote, "doing my best to disregard the many inflammatory President O statements and roadblocks, thought it was going to be a smooth transition. Not!" Exclamation. And we're back with the panel now. Daniel Halper of the New York Post, Katie Pavlik, news editor at townhall.com, Amy Walter, national editor for the Cook Political Report, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Daniel, you pick it up.
What's fascinating is they both have a vested interest in actually being chummy with each other. I mean, Barack Obama has his legacy on the line, and how Donald Trump responds to this really, and how he responds to Barack Obama in the months to come, I think really will set Barack Obama's legacy for the years to come, and how we look at it historically, whether or not he repeals everything and turns back everything that Barack Obama has accomplished. Likewise, it's not to Trump's interest to annoy President Obama. He needs President Obama to sort of be respectful of him while he's in office. But it's their egos, and they're not able to sort of contain them enough to where it's responsible for either side and do what's in their best interest.
Well, they must have had a premonition of what you just said right now, because they had a phone conversation this afternoon. Listen up.
We had a general conversation. I think the Secretary's speech really spoke for itself, but we had a very general conversation. Very, very nice. Appreciate everybody calling.
Katie?
Very, very nice conversation with the president. I agree. I think this is completely about ego. I mean, President Obama took a shot at Donald Trump, essentially, and Hillary Clinton, quite frankly, by saying that he could have won a third term by having better messaging. And Trump responded. And this just goes to show that the long-standing feud between the two of them is ongoing even in the transition process. I mean, we can't forget that President Obama thought he got the last laugh with the birth certificate issue, and then Donald Trump won the presidency. So I think that he's probably up one on President Obama. But in terms of the staff and the transition, the White House team is doing just fine working with the transition team at Trump Tower. Sean Spicer said yesterday that things are going quite smoothly. So the two men at the top might be having some ego battles, but I think overall the transition is going just fine.
Then again, there is this issue of Russia. That thing we just talked about is just one component of it. There's also Russia, as the administration is announcing new measures to crack down on their cyber warfare and to retaliate for that. It throws a wrench into Donald Trump's plans to cultivate a better relationship with Russia.
Yeah, and it's not just the president. I mean, you also have John McCain and Lindsey Graham saying that there needs to be some pushback from the United States, significant, whether it's sanctions, something else, to tell Russia that this was not okay. And what Lindsey Graham is saying is, well, let's wait until for a new president to do this, not for this president. Let's have it start on a fresh foot, fresh Congress, fresh president. But the fact is there are many Republicans, it's not just the president, who wants to say to Russia, not okay, there will be penalties for what you did. I don't know how successful that will be. To the point of the back and forth between Obama and Trump on who could have won had they run against each other, this reminds me of what little kids do when they're debating which superhero would win. Is it Batman versus Spider-Man? Who would win the contest? It's a ridiculous argument. It's never going to happen. It didn't happen. I think the other thing, though, that that President Obama was saying in that podcast, more than just an ego thing, was saying to Democrats, do not be despondent. We lost, but our agenda and our messaging is still powerful. Despite the fact that we lost the presidency and during my tenure in office, we've lost many, many, many seats. Underneath, we're still going to be okay.
And a reminder to our viewers that President Obama has just leased an office in the World Wildlife Fund building here. He's going to be around and undoubtedly matching Trump, presumably word for word, Charles.
Look, when Obama says nothing happened here, we lost one election, we're not finished, I think he's being semi-delusional. I mean, the damage that his party has suffered in his 8 years in office are incalculable. They lost about 1,000 seats in the state legislatures. They have been decimated in the states, in the governorships. They've lost the House, they've lost the Senate, and now, of course, the presidency. The reason that when people talk about who's going to run in 2020, they're all octogenarians or nearly, is because the bench has been wiped out. It's, you know, there's been a prairie fire. So Obama, and look, and it's not hard to explain. Obama was personally popular, remained so. His numbers are high, so when he's on the ballot, he wins. But he just overreached as a liberal with Obamacare, with cap and trade, with all of the regulations, and he had a very slow recovery. He thinks that he succeeded. The country doesn't. Obama himself said in 2010 and 2014 and then 16, I'm not on the ballot, but my policy, my legacy is. That's exactly what happened, and his legacy was rejected. And I don't think he understands that. He refuses to accept it. He's preaching otherwise, and he will be the most politically active ex-president that we have had in a long time, starting by the fact that he's staying in Washington, and he's saying that within a year or so he's going to start expressing himself. I think he's not going to wait a year or so.
One of the interesting observations I sort of detect in all this is that you had this huge forces, these bipolar forces butting heads in the United States. You know, red state, blue state. It's erupting in this transition period with an earthquake. It'll settle down again. But what do our allies and our enemies think of this sort of bipolar shift from one extreme to the other in this country? What are they supposed to make of? Daniel?
Well, the Israelis obviously are very vocal and their bafflement of being betrayed by the Obama administration, and I think everybody else is sort of laying low, trying to figure out how President Trump, when he becomes president, acts, how he because it's sort of an unknown. I mean, we know how he was as a candidate, which was, of course, never predictable. The question is will he become more predictable? Will he become, you know, sort of more reliable and more conventional, or will he continue the same path? This fight with President Obama, or maybe not, fight's a little too extreme, this little skirmish, suggests that he is Donald Trump and he will continue to be.
Katie, it used to be that old expression that these political battles, these differences of opinion stopped at the water's edge when it came to foreign policy. That certainly no longer applies.
Well, certainly based on what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail when it regards to NATO, obviously Israel is putting a lot of stake in the Trump presidency with the moves that were made at the UN last week. But foreign policy is different than domestic policy, and so I think we'll see some big changes, but I also think that a lot of things will stay the same. A lot of our allies will remain the same. I think some of the allies who have felt betrayed by the Obama administration will come back and try to mend those relationships, and our enemies will certainly be watching and looking for weaknesses that they can exploit.
And the good news is in a couple of weeks we're actually going to see the nominees for these cabinet positions up in front of the hearings, and they're going to express themselves, get questions, so we're going to actually get something tangible rather than just assumptions about who these people are and what they're going to do.
Quickly, Charles.
I am nearly amused by the thought that in 100 capitals all over the world, every morning, leaders wake up and ask themselves, what did he tweet last night? Coming from the one power on earth where, you know, they say in Canada, being Canadian is like a mouse sleeping with an elephant. The world sleeps with the elephant, and they have no idea what he's going to do by morning.
Well, they'll get used to it. We're getting used to it. That's it for the panel, but up next, the reaction to a Christmas surprise now being seen around the world.